Sorry, thank you. So welcome back. I think it's been so far a really interesting day. I hope you've enjoyed the panels. I certainly have, and I've certainly learnt a lot. And it's my honor to introduce our last panel. The subject of our panel is working hand in hand, new collaborations between the collector, the gallerist, and the artist. And we're lucky to have representatives of Gallerist and artist, and also two, shall we say, philanthropists, really. I'm going to introduce them from the right-hand side. So starting at my far right, we have Jean Altounian, who is vice president of the Center of Centre d'Art Contemporain, in Geneva, which he has presided over for 25 years. But he says he's not a collector. Earlier in the panel we discussed being a collector. He says he's not a collector, but he does buy art. So we have decided that everyone's a collector after the last panel. So, so it's up to you, Jean. To his left, to my right, we have Jérôme Poggi, who is the Galerie Jérôme Poggi, who's therefore a gallerist, but also has a very interesting not-for-profit project, which he will tell you about. It's much better if they tell you about their projects and not myself. To his left, we've got Kees. I've forgotten Visser. Sorry, I forgot your last name. Who's an artist, originally from Holland, but who spent many, many years in Iceland, and who will talk a bit about his practice, I hope, and who is represented by Jérôme Poggi. And finally, on my right, we have Sandra Terdjman, who also has, she has two not-for-profits which she will talk about. So I'm going to work on the basis of ladies first. I'm going to ask Sandra to kick off our proceedings by telling us more about her projects in the plural.
Bonsoir. I think so. We're talking in English. Yeah. Sure. I'll mention briefly the two institutions that I co-founded. The first one is Gallerist Art Foundation. It's a non-for-profit foundation based in Paris and San Francisco. We have now a collection of hundreds of works. I don't exactly know the number. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that we've tried to really accompany artists in the development of their practice, through not only acquiring, but also creating a residency for artists in Paris and San Francisco, so supporting their work in different ways. And later, like 3 years ago, I founded another institution called Council, and we basically create a situation. It can be workshop, can be a theater play, can be an exhibition, where people from different disciplines, from the arts and science and the civil society, meet, discuss on social issue, like one social issue, and then work together towards the development of that issue, creating new work of art. And through that process, I've been involving collector as well to engage in such a process and produce work. So, yeah, maybe I'll talk more later about how collection is present in both of these projects and how collecting practice can be, is essential in our ecosystem for the arts.
Yeah, it is on. Yeah.
It's on.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Kees Visser. I'm from Holland, and I started my artistic activities in the early 70s. Without doing formal formation, so I'm autodidact. And my interest in art goes back from when I was much younger. I did a lot of drawing, later became interested more in cinema, but finally turned back to painting, and that's what I'm still doing today. And I'm working with Jérôme at the moment. There is a show at the Gallery for another 2 weeks. And it is a long period because it's over 40 years, and I don't know exactly how to give you a short version of that. But in the late 70s, I started going to Iceland, which immensely influenced my life and my work. And from Reykjavil, I moved to Paris, which was a big jump. and lived here for 5 years, and that is where my more professional side of my career took off. And I was already over 40 by then. The earlier years are much more a formation time, and the later 20, 25 years are the work that I'm still doing today. So I give you that short version, I think.
And you also, I think you founded as well, in Reykjavik, you founded a not-for-profit as well?
Yeah, the first thing we founded was in Holland, was a gallery with Icelandic friends. And in those days, the art world was completely the opposite of what it is today. And artists looked for non-profit venues. And if you would today propose an artist to do a show and you say it's non-profit, you say, maybe later. So that was a time when the art was much smaller. I think also that the art activities like conceptual art, performance art, all influenced by fluxes and the happenings even earlier in the late 50s and so, created that climate of non-commercial interest, more poetical, more the content than the packaging. And later in Iceland, when I moved over there, I was part of the foundation of the Living Art Museum, which still exists today and which will have its 40th birthday next year. Moved into a beautiful new building this year. So if you have the occasion to go to Reykjavik, go and see that. And I was, again, back in Holland, doing a lot of artist books, and I was co-founder of Boekie Woekie, which is a Dutch wordplay on book and on Mondrian, of course. And that was founded in the early 80s, and it still exists today, although I'm not part of it any longer. Yeah.
So I think it'll be very interesting to come back as we continue our discussion about the changes you've seen, because we're going to be talking about new collaborations. So, but we will come back to that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we'll move on to Jérôme and tell us a little bit about your dual world that you live in.
Well, actually, it is true that I'm also running two organizations. One is a gallery, the other one is a not-for-profit organization, une association, la 1901. That I've been running separately until now. I'm trying nowadays to interconnect the two activities. I'm going to present you the one of the not-for-profit called Societies, but before I would like to tell you a few words about the reason why I've always been wishing to open a gallery. So as far as I can remember, when I was a student, I wanted to open a gallery because to my eyes, having a gallery was building a bridge between the art scene and the whole society. So this is really, my passion, just to be a bridge, to be a mediator between, art and society. And, nowadays I've been running the gallery for 8 years. And, I am indeed a tie between the art world and the society, but a very small part of the society. I mean, a gallery, as it is nowadays, a commercial structure, an SARL, can only allow you to act on the art market and then to reach just a very tiny part of the society, that is collectors who are able to spend a few thousand euros to purchase a work of art. So I'm very happy with that because I find it very important because it's part of the economy of the works of art. But I mean, I was in a way a little disappointed not to be able to reach a larger part of the society through that activity in the gallery. So this is the reason why I've been developing next to it the not-for-profit organization, societies, that allow me to work beyond the art market because I'm convinced that the economy of the art cannot be reduced to the art market. And especially nowadays, when you can see such changing in the economy, the global economy of use, and not only an economy of exchange. So I think it also concerns the art market. And so that other tool that I created a few years ago enabled me to explore a new kind of commerce of art between art and society. I'm using that word commerce that maybe doesn't really make sense in English as it does in French. It's more a literary commerce, un commerce symbolique, un commerce littéraire, as you can make commerce of ideas or commerce of feelings. So we are trying to explore a new kind of commerce between art and society through that not-for-profit. But maybe later I'm going to tell you more about, the action that we're trying to develop or that we experience.
Well, I think I've lost half of my microphone. I think we'll come back to that because we want to know more exactly, particularly about how society works. Right, there we go. But I'd like to finish now with Jean, who comes from wealth management, who has his own wealth management company. But actually, we're obviously interested here in the Centre d'Art Contemporain of Geneva that you were vice president of for many, many years. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, the Centre was created in 1974 by Adelina von Fürstenberg, and it was a small venture, and I joined it a few years later, first as a treasurer, and then I became president of the Centre. It was an association à but non lucratif, and the Centre's function is really to show artists. In German, it would be called a Kunsthalle, un lieu d'exposition. It doesn't have a collection. The role of the Centre is really to promote younger artists, or even to put back on how would you say, artists that have been maybe forgotten from the 70s or 80s, and put them back on the front scene.
Bring them back onto the front stage.
Voilà.
Stage.
Exactly. And unlike what I heard earlier, the Centre has benefited a lot from the funding of the Ville de Genève, the state funding. It has been anywhere between 50 to 70% of the funding, but it has always stayed pretty clear from any involvement in the artistic choices. And in fact, I myself, as president of the Centre, with the board, we've always kept our role to be an administrative role, and keep the director running the artistic show.
So I think it would be interesting because we have with us two people who have more history, shall we say, history. And then two other people who have, a more contemporary, perhaps, take on it. So I'd be interested to hear from you, Jean, and from Kees, what things were like. When we were talking earlier, one of the things you told me, Jean, that it was very rare when you were starting to take an interest in the Centre and to see, for example, collectors sponsoring works of art. That just didn't happen.
Yes. Over the 25 years I've been involved with the Centre, I mean, there's no question that the market has changed a lot. It has professionalized. Artists were coming earlier in the previous panel, they were talking about contracts. I mean, we didn't have contracts. People were working till 3 o'clock in the morning because the show was opening the next morning. You don't have that anymore. You even have contracts with your employees, and if they work after 7 o'clock, you have to be very careful. So that's, I would say, the highlight of what I've seen moving.
The change.
The change. It is a market. There's no question about it. It has.
Does our market have to be overwhelming? Can we not? I mean, we're talking about new collaborations. I mean, can it not be outside the market, or do you have to?
You're part of the market, but not the market we were talking about in the previous panel, which we were talking about the mega artists. There are thousands of others who don't require so much funding, and you can have a beautiful show with 10, 20,000 francs or euros. And you can have also the mega ones. I think the market is very diverse, and that's good. Let's keep it that way. And we were talking about the collectors. I remember 20 years ago, the director of Metro Picture was saying to me, I know who are the 200 largest collectors in the world. Today, he doesn't anymore. There are thousands of them. So the market has widened. It's probably a good thing, but it has also its negatives. It has professionalized.
And Kees, the differences that you see when you started out, you said that nobody really minded whether they made money or not.
That's not really that simple.
Not what you said, not exactly.
It was not so dominated by commerce. But of course it was a market at that point as well. But there was, for example, like you said, we worked until late in the morning to open a show. It was more improvised. And the public participated in this improvisation also. It did not expect this perfectionism like you can experience it today. So that I think is a big difference. We also needed money, but I think the whole level of life was a lot more simple then as well. And I also profited from a deal with the state in Holland, which existed in those years. Not the first 7-8 years or so, but then friends of mine pushed me, and I said, well, I'm okay because I sell a piece now and then. I make frames for colleagues now and then. And I managed to get by on this lower budget that was required in those days. Today, you could not do that. And the state helped, finally. I profited from that state contract, which I had for a few years. But then I moved back to Iceland again, and when I came back to Holland, I took a job as a teacher, because it didn't exist anymore. Nowadays, in Holland, you only have the Mondrian Foundation, which probably supports about 200 artists a year, whereas in my days it was over 3,000, I think. So, there's big differences. Yeah.
So, Jérôme, it would be good if you could tell us now, we're going to move on to Jérôme and Sandra, about these new models that both of you have been working and creating and encouraging.
Well, so as I told you, I'm trying to experience through the not-for-profit new kind of, commerce between art and society. That means new kind of political economy for the arts. And to start with, I had the chance to meet with an artist whose name is François Hers. He's an artist who did invent a few years ago, 25 years ago, a new model of artistic policy for the Fondation de France. I don't know if you know about the Fondation de France. It is a private foundation in France that gathers and collects, the generosity of French citizens when they want to give something for when you have an earthquake in Haiti or whatever. If you want to give 50 euros, you give it to Fondation de France, and so their role is to redistribute, the money that is collected. And so a part of the money is used for an artistic purpose or cultural purpose. And before the beginning of the 90s, they had no model of an artistic policy. And so they commissioned to an artist a new model of cultural policy for Fondation de France. And this is quite unique. Just to ask an artist to invent a political model for cultural policy. So François invented something, just to make it short, that is in French. First, it is called Les Nouveaux Commanditaires. That is translated in English into the new patrons. That is not exactly, telling what we mean by Nouveau Commanditaire. Actually, just to present the concept, it is a kind of democratization of the notion of artistic commission. Because artistic commission in the history of art is very important. When you read books of history of art, you will see that many very decisive, important works of art were the result not only of the genius of an artist, but of a kind of dialogue between an artist and a commissioner, a commanditaire. But until recently, the only person who were able to commission a work to an artist were people with a kind of political, religious, or financial power. So the question that François raised in the early 90s was, how can you democratize, the access to the commission to anyone in a democratic society? So the Nouveau Commanditaire program is something quite simple. It allows anyone who wants, through the society, the Civic Society, to be able to initiate a public commission. Instead of having public commissions that are initiated by the top of the pyramid, like politicians, for instance, then you bet that through the society, many people may face a situation when they do need a work of art to answer, I don't know, a symbolic a question of representation or a problem of identity or whatever. And when they face, such a need for art, they can ask the Fondation de France to support, not only financially, but also methodologically.
The methodology.
Voilà. So the process of commissioning a work of art to an artist. So maybe to make it more clear, just to quote a few examples of commissions that were achieved during the last 25 years. So more than 500 commissions were achieved. So not only in France, but all throughout Europe and even worldwidely. And just to give you a few examples, it can be one of the very first one is very explicit. It was coroners, des médecins légistes from the Garches Hospital next to Paris, where you do have a pavilion of the dead, and you have a morgue that is in the basement, and at the first floor you have la salle des départs, that is a nice room, it's a large room where you on met en bière, you put the bodies into the coffin and you close the coffin. Donc c'est la mise en bière. And you have little rooms that are rooms when you recognize the bodies, de reconnaissance des corps, because when you have an accident or an
identify the bodies.
The bodies. So, and in the early 90s, the hospital had a plan to renove the whole hospital, including the pavilion of the dead. And the coroner, the chief of the pavilion, said, well, that's not enough, actually. We do not only need, a new layer of white painting. So what we are missing is a shape for that pavilion that fits the meaning of the pavilion. I mean, everybody understands, what's going on in this pavilion, and the meaning of it. But the shape of it, its architecture, is not at the same level because it was really something morbid, white painting, and you have on the ground ceramic, black and white. Yeah. So it was very, very medical, very clinical. And so the coroner said only an artist can, in a laic society, be able to invent a new shape for a morgue, that would be meaningful for the people using the morgue. And so, but he didn't know how to do. So he's a coroner, he's not an art critic, he's not a curator, he's not an art historian. Of course, he knows someone who is an artist, close to in his first circle, yes, in his environment. But he wanted a big artist. I mean, the stakes of the situation, really needed a very important artist. So he didn't know what to do. So what he did at that time is that he opened the phone book and looked for a patron. And by chance, he called the Fondation de France. And so he got on the standardiste and said, well, you're going to be very surprised by, my request, but I'm a coroner and I do need an artist. And I don't know how to do. So could you please help me? And so it was perfect. I mean, for François, he was in his office, just saying, I'm sure there are people who are needing, artists and they don't know how to do. And so a mediator was named and could meet the coroners and the whole team of it and analyzed with them, their needs. What are they facing? What do they need? And proposed to them to commission a work of art to an Italian artist whose name is Ettore Spalletti. And they accepted. And then they commissioned to Spalletti to, reinvent the whole morgue of the Garches Hospital. And it is something that is very spectacular nowadays. So the morgue is visited by architects from all over the world. So the relationship even to death and to the pavilion itself changed totally. And even in the hospital, it is not anymore a place...
What did he do?
What he did is that he designed the catafalques. The benches where you install the coffin, And he painted the whole room in blue and installed marble and made a fountain and vases, also marble vases that are installed all over the place and things
So
like
he
that.
created a new environment.
It's a totally new environment. And after they went beyond also, because after the coroner said, well, sometimes when you have people who are not believers, they do not really know how to organize, the ceremony of the la mise en bière. They don't know what to do. And so they wanted to commission to musicians music that could be used by these persons. Because when you are a Catholic, Protestant, Juif, or whatever, I mean, you have a ritual, that is already that exists already. And so, but it's not the case for lay people. So they wanted to go further and to commission also music. And then after, we can also imagine that a ritual could be commissioned to an artist. And I'm facing this kind of context also in other commissions. For instance, I'm very much involved in the university field, high schools, and there is a university that commissioned a new ceremony for the diploma that they want to. It's something that disappeared in France. The rituals and symbols have disappeared in France after May 68. And so now there is a desire that is raising, to commission new rituals, new symbols for the university life also.
But this was with the Fondation de France. But your Nouveau Commanditaire, you also run this separately with your société, or is this connected?
Well, so this program of Fondation de France, that is totally not non-profit, so is developed through societies.
Ah, right.
So we are a number of mediators in France who are agreed or certified by Fondation de France to be able to develop that kind of model, and each of us develop it through an association.
So the funding comes from the Fondation de France. You don't use, for example, crowdfunding for anything?
Sometimes we do, yeah, actually. Well, half of the budget is coming from Fondation de France, and then after we have to find, the missing part of it. And sometimes we used indeed crowdfunding. For instance, I remember it was a commission to Claude Kloski. So the commissioners were a group of students from the University Paris 1, Paris-Sorbonne, and they created une association des anciens élèves of the university, and they wanted to commission a work that would embody that new association. As if, it was revealing that in the French university, there is an esprit de corps that is appearing in the French university that did not exist until recently. And they wanted to embody that esprit, that spirit, in a work of art. And so I proposed to them to commission the work to Claude Kloski, who had to work with the database, the list of the members of the association. And so he created a website through which you can edit business cards. So, and everybody, even people who are not members of the association, you can use that website just to create a unique business card that plays with your work.
So it's not only public work.
What is interesting in the Les Nouveaux Commanditaires is that the notion of public and private is blurred. A little blurred. It's not blurred, actually. It's more complex because, we cannot be Manichaean and say there is public and private. So it also allows to explore what is the public sphere, what is the public life more than public space. We are not speaking anymore about public space, but about public life. And you have very little interstices, little spaces of public life, that you cannot think about if you do not pay attention to, to the life that is spreading all over the world. So that's what is also very interesting in that model. It allows you to explore, what is public life.
Sandra,
yes, I was actually wondering about the public life of the work that Nouveau Commanditaire produce. Who takes care of them? Is it the Civic Society, the commissioner, or is Fondation France looking after them? Is it your job?
What do you mean, after the work was inaugurated, or?
Yeah, exactly. How is it experienced? How is it conserved, if it needs, and so on?
What is interesting is that, so you make works of art appear in a public domain, let's say that. And of course, when you have a sculpture, for instance, the sculpture sometimes is not understood by the people who are not the commissioners, and sometimes it can be rejected, and you can have act of vandalism, against a work of art. It's not a rule, but with works that were commissioned by people, by citizens, there is more respect most of the time in regards to the work, because also the ambassador of the works are the commissioners themselves. For instance, you have an interesting sculpture of Xavier Vaillant that was commissioned by a group of inhabitants and shopkeepers in Tours. So there is a square called La Place du Vieux Marché, and there was a lack of identity for that place. That's pour cette place. And so the inhabitants wanted to commission a work of art that would give an identity to that place. And it was quite a big scandal, when the work of art appeared, because first of all, it was a work of contemporary art. So in such a town as Tours, it was 20 years ago, that is quite conservative, or at least it is a very historical town. So the appearance of a modern shape was quite a shock for a part of the population. But then the one who could explain to them, why it appeared and why it fitted so well the place was not an art critic. It was the commissioners themselves. So it was a flower, une fleuriste. It was a bartender, and they are the one who explain, what is the work, what is contemporary art, what is the work of Xavier Vaillant. So it makes a great difference between, their own speech and the speech of a professional, an art critic that would try to explain why it is so interesting. So it really makes things really different in the way the work can live after its inauguration.
Sandra, are there parallels between what you do and what...
Sure. No, the Nouveau Commanditaire, the new patrons, was a model for us when we started the council. There's, of course, a lot of difference, but the inspiration comes from the same idea of involving the civic society. The big difference is that we start from the issue. There's a social issue that we look at, and then we involve different people. They can be artists, scientists, different practitioners, different experts, and we think that each of them has, in fact, a form of expertise on that social issue and can contribute to renewing our understanding of that issue. And I believe, and I've always thought that collectors could also be part of that circle. So they would not only acquire a work of art at the end of the process, going through a gallery or going to a fair, but they would be aware of a work in the making and be able to participate in terms of co-production. And more than that, they would be involved in the issue that we're working on. So we wouldn't only tell them, oh, there's this new work by that and that artist, but we would tell them, look, at the moment we're working on deaf culture or deaf knowledge of people with disability, or we're working, which was one of our first projects, or we're working on gender issues and sexualities through law. So, one of our collectors is a lawyer and is involved not only to support the work of art, but also because that's his field of expertise. That's where he comes from. So he brings social value, as we were saying before. And that's the same for the third project we did on climate change, or how to measure climate change. So yeah, the big idea is, or the bet, is that all of us are concerned by different issues, but we cannot be concerned by everything. So the idea is to gather people with same concern, but bringing on the table different.
So it's very interesting because all of these collaborations are sort of separate from the market. How do you think they could be? Do you think, in the case of Jean, we have the La Ville de Genève that's giving some support. There's the Fondation de France. Can there be more institutional support or state support or municipal support? Would that help? Or actually are these initiatives actually quite working well as they are? Or what could be done to improve these?
As long as they don't get involved in the artistic choices.
Yes. Yeah. Does that happen, though?
I think for the market, there's. I think we have to work beyond boundaries, beyond limits between public and private. Again, if you're concerned by a subject or you want to be involved, it doesn't matter where exactly it comes from. So yeah, mixed economy. And if we talk about collection, today artists are not only working with making paintings or sculptures, so not making unique work. They're making films, they're making video, they're making performances, sound art, and so on. So all these fields come from different markets. There's a market for dance that is very different than the art market you are practicing. There's a market for cinema, very different from the one we're using in the arts. So personally, I'm facing a very interesting situations where when you want to produce and support an artist, you have to analyze the different markets or scheme that exist and sort of mix them with one another.
I can say that I evolved with the changes that took place over the last 40 years. And that, especially at the period in which I moved to Paris, it really started changing. It was in the early 90s. The Cold War was over. The computer started to influence life. And communication changed enormously. And commerce became more important in art. And because it happens in front of you, you just adapt, you evolve with it. For me, it's very different to project something for the future, to say which direction it should go, because it is a massive movement. And I think what individual ideas can contribute is to pronounce them and to have an exchange, which can influence the direction it will take.
Jean, we were talking earlier, you also work with ballet.
Yes.
You are president or founder of Fluxum?
No, I'm just one of the founding members of the Fondation Fluxum, yes.
Yes, which is working. Do you see, there's a great deal of various artistic practices overlapping. Do you, when you're hearing this about visual art, are you also seeing anything parallel in the world of performing arts like ballet?
I agree with you. Today an artist uses so many different ways of expressing his work. Being member of the Centre d'Art Contemporain and Fluxum, we try to do bridges between the two institutions, but it is always difficult because the director of one institution will want to have his own line of work, and the other one his own line of work. So I found very difficult unless it comes from the director who has chosen the artist, who would like to have that kind of collaboration. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, I think so.
No, I just wanted to answer the former question that you asked about, new position that actors could take in a new economy for the arts. It reminds me of a question that I had also a few years ago. I was also participating to such a panel. It was a conversation in Miami Art Basel, and so we were speaking about this new model of economy for the arts, and I was explaining, what I'm doing through societies, and then after the moderator asked for the place, the position or the role a collector could take into such a process, and I could not answer at that time. I had a big blank. It was quite embarrassing. I didn't know what to say.
I was there.
Because
you were there. I was watching.
Oh yes, I remember. And so because I've always took care just to separate, the two activities that I was, running, the gallery and societies. And through societies, I'm never involving artists that I'm representing through the gallery for deontological reason. And so, I really took care just to separate it, but even theoretically or politically. And so the moderator asked me just to connect the two activities. So when I came back to France, I started, speaking with collectors of the gallery and telling them about what I'm doing next to it. That didn't know, actually. Most of them, they didn't know that I was involved in the societies. And so I explain, the nouveau commanditaire, for instance, and describing, the whole process of it and the role that the commissioners took in the economy of the work. And I could see big collectors in front of me, who are owning, hundreds of works, and they know all the art scene, international art scene. They are invited in every studio, every dinner, every gala dinner. They know everybody, but they never experience at that level, what my médecin légiste, my coroner, my football player, did experience. And so I could see that they were jealous in a way. There is something, the way they are involved in the economy of the work, that is mainly by purchasing a work of art. That is very important because it is not only, something financial, it is something that is also very symbolic and political, just to give money and to give a check like that. We know that some artists in the past, I'm always thinking about, EFP, and when you can see two hands, exchanging a check, the hand of a collector who is around, by the way, and giving a check to the artist. And so we started to speak with the collectors about, different ways, in which they could get invested, in the process of a work of art, not only by buying the work, but maybe by supporting the work or being a patron also of the work. And I remember a collector, it's an important one in Paris, who decided to quit, purchasing work of art during 1 year, and who tried to spend the money that he usually devoted to the works to differently, and in particular just to support a public work of art, that were commissioned for an institution in Europe, and so because he wanted to see if the pleasure or the satisfaction, was the same if he was spending money to own something or to support something with a public purpose, and I think now he's doing both. Really? So that's what also we're trying to experience, through societies, the role of the collector, the new position he can have, and just to enlarge the notion of economy of the arts, that is not only mercantile, just to see other ways to get involved.
But you have collaborations also between artists and collectors, which I've experienced. And it was before I started working with Jérôme. And it's a friend of mine who is here present, Daniel Bosser. And I met him because I was a teacher in Nîmes where he saw work. And then later we met and he came to the studio and he decided he wanted a painting. And 2 weeks later he phoned me, he said, it has to be 2 paintings. And there started a commission because he had made a choice for a painting. And then I started making samples of colors and suggest 2 or 3 options. And then he said, there are so many options. Actually, I think there should be 4 paintings. And so it took a whole year to develop this work. And Daniel, in those days, changed his apartment every 2 years and invited the Paris art world to his house. And when finally that day came, there were 9 paintings. And so it evolved really from my side, from his side. I had to set limits sometimes, and I had also to adapt to the apartment itself, the architecture, and the whole thing evolved very organically. And the same is true for wall paintings that I've made for people, which are not very easy to sell, but it has happened. And those are also things where you have to go and look at the location, take the measures, the scale and everything, and adapt your concept to the local situation, which is also a form of dialogue between the collector and the artist.
But it's interesting because at one point Jean said, yes, but you don't want to have the commanditaire interfering in the creative process. And now you're working with somebody, you're working within the constraints of his domestic environment. So how do you balance that out? Is there a danger that ultimately the commanditaire could be changing your artistic vision?
I don't think so. I did, I think, over 25 wall paintings. I only sold 3, which were adapted to that location. But the other ones were located also somewhere, where I also had to adapt to architecture. And instead of having a collector in front of me, it was a director or an organizer, or a commissaire d'expo, or something like that. So you have, in that sort of in situ works, you have to exchange your ideas. And there is often something that when you enter a space that you have some sort of flash. That remains most of the time, the core of the work. But there can be small modifications because of whatever reason. It's difficult to give a good example, but this is a sort of a cinema, for example, and I was invited in the Crédac in Ivry, and you came in from the higher side of the room. And the installation I made with them was that I had a line of 20-something small paintings at eye level there, which were very high there, and I restarted at eye level in this end of the room, and it touched the floor in the other end. And there's always this sort of ideas that occur in a very short moment when you enter a space. I think that's the most essential moment for a work. And the rest is dialogue between 2 or 3 or more people.
I guess there's a fine line between the commanditaire that chooses the artist to do a piece.
He has already an option.
Voilà, he's chosen you, and because he likes your work, and he would like to see it there. But it would be a shame to get to the stage where he says, "No, you've put too much blue. I'd like to have some red."
Yeah, that's out of the question. Right. There is a certain level, but normally those problems have not occurred to me. No.
Well, really, for Jérôme and Sandra, have you ever had the situation where you have commissioned a work of art or worked on an art of art that actually has been a disappointment or hasn't corresponded to what you had hoped or what the people who were financing it hoped? Has this ever gone horribly wrong?
We're not giving names, but
without naming names, of course.
No, I had a few not so good experience in co-producing works through biennales or large-scale exhibition, where there's such a production machine attached to those exhibitions that you cannot really be involved in the process. So you're really supporting, giving a grant or some, financially. But then these machines are so huge that they are not able to tailor the production the way it should be. So the artists end up not having exactly the work that he was supposed to do. The sculpture has shrinked because it didn't fit in a crate, so it has to be taken on a plane. Videos are not shown properly, so the experience is not well made, and so on. And so there's a risk. Actually, you're not able to really follow every single steps of a production and be in relation with the artist, that the work ends up not being the one you imagine.
And what is the artist's reaction?
In this the sculpture scenario, the one that shrinked, he is a young artist from India. So being in a biennale was the most important part, which that's exactly why we wanted to support him. But the result, he was not strong enough maybe to,
And Jérôme, this has never happened to you?
I cannot remember any example that could be interesting, but what we're trying to do is to avoid a dialogue between an artist and an institution or something that is abstract, an abstract context. Most of the time we really try to keep a dialogue between two persons. It is a one-to-one process, what we are trying to develop through the Nouveau Commanditaire. And even when you have a commission, that is related to an institution, for instance, right now we have a commission with Anne-Veronica Jensen for the University of Paris, Paris Diderot, Paris 7. So, the commissioners are not the university itself. Actually, they are commissioning a work that would illustrate, their relationship to Diderot and to Le Siècle des Lumières. So they wanted to have a work, that would embody that notion of light in all its meanings. And so I proposed Anne-Veronica Jensen. It is a work that will mark the entrance of the university on the Avenue de France, dans le 13e arrondissement. And but the commissioners is not the university itself. That is too abstract. I mean, the commissioners are 3 persons who are vice presidents of the university. But I mean, they do have face, and the artist, she knows to whom she's speaking to. Because sometimes when you are facing an institution as a commissioner, then sometimes it can become a little tacky. I mean, and you can some problems of the context is stronger, than the means of the artist, and sometimes it can, be very contraint for the artist. So that's what we're trying to do, just to avoid this kind of situation.
And Jean, at the Centre d'Art Contemporain, it's a Kunsthalle, as you say, so there's no commissioning of works, or even on a temporary basis, or for exhibitions, will there be commissions?
No, I don't think we've ever had commissioned work.
Mm-hmm.
We're basically the kind of support we've always sought was support for a show, support for the institution, but not to a specific work. We did have once a gallerist who suggested to commission work to then buy it, but we tried to avoid that.
Yeah. And you personally, as a collector, non-collector, whatever how you define yourself, do you commission works, or have you had commissioned a little bit like what happened?
No, I don't commission work. Once we've had this French artist whom we liked very much, and decided to have a work of hers in our dining room, and because the ceiling was not very high, it was very difficult to have something above our dining table, and she came, and she does work with feathers, and again, that's exactly what I was referring to. We liked her. We decided to have her in our house, but then she decided the kind of work she wanted to have.
And you left her complete artistic freedom. Mm. I'm going to open up to questions now, because I'm sure that you have questions. Can you please put your hand up and wait, there's one already there, and wait for the microphone, which I'm going to hand over. And we now have to share mics.
Merci. First of all, I'm from Reunion Island, and I want to remember that one of the greatest art seller of the first part of the century, the 20th century, was born in Reunion Island. It was Ambroise Vollard. And he made a link between collectors, artists, and his own job of a gallerist. It was one of the first gallerists who sold painters to United States, especially Dr. Barnes. And at this moment, a lot of jobs are going to disappear with the e-market and with 3D printers, like opticians, like jewelry, like perhaps doctors tomorrow, because we know that computers would be very sure in diagnosis tomorrow. How do you think your business will be impacted by this new technology tomorrow, or now? And what sort of business model could be built or could be rise up phase to 2.0?
So you're talking about business, but I think we're really not talking that much about the market. You're talking about these models of philanthropy, these models of new collaborations, right? How will new technologies impact?
It's not, it's about business model, yes, but how to make a collaboration between this new business model and with all actors of the market, or of all actors on this market.
Well, I think this is really mainly a business.
Yes, but well, what I'm seeing, as we all do, is that the economy, the global economy, is really changing a lot nowadays, becoming more immaterial. So we are living, an era of the economy is an economy of exchange for an economy of use. That has always existed, but it is becoming more and more and more important. And I'm really wondering about, the consequences on the art market. That is a very conservative market. I think it is the most conservative market ever. I mean, all the attempt of the artists to escape from that logic of market during the 60s, conceptual art or performing art has always been, by the market just to create new single works, numbered, and, you can sell Void, but it's an edition of 8, and so... And I can understand it, so I'm making fun of it. I can understand because there is a logical investment behind. I mean, if you want to finance also, I mean, the research, I mean, in art, I mean, you must find money where it is. So you can ask also collectors to participate to something that is a little artificial, but just to get money. But so that's the question, I'm wondering about, the transformation of the economy of the arts also. I won't speak about an uberization of the art market, but anyway, I mean, things are changing very much. So, and I don't know, I'm not a visionary, so I'm just trying and experiencing things like that. It reminds me of the 19th century, when the economy of the art was transformed into a market economy. At that time, you had a number of attempts to explore all the possibilities of economy between the art and the society. And there was one in particular that was based on, well, one of them was to rent works of art. So you had many agencies, des agences de location d'œuvres d'art at that time. So that failed, most of them. But nowadays you have Artothèque, and sometimes it works very well. Maybe later I'm going to tell you about the MIT in the US, where they do have an Artothèque on the campus, and they loan works of art to the students, who have the possibility to live during 6 months of their student life and to have that familiarity with the work of art. That is, to my eyes, the most important thing we must offer people to experience, to live with the work of art. It's great to be able to see a work of art in a museum, of course, but most of the time you spend 5 minutes with that work, and that would be the only 5 minutes in your whole life. I think the pleasure of a collector is to live with a work of art and to see it, during the winter, during summer, to see it when you're glad, when you're sad, when you are, awake or sleepy or whatever, And then the work of art, reveal all its depth. So that's the most important. So I think in the MIT, that initiative that allows the students to experience, that coexistence with the work of art is really something fabulous. And it can create, new collectors, because, I mean, if you experience that relationship with the work of art, I mean, maybe you will want to have it later in your life. So that was one model that was experienced during the 19th century, and the other one was a model based on the notion of comment on dit les droits d'auteur, copyright, yes. So at that time, you had some experience of artists in particular who said that, it's a model, an economic model based on the musical model, when the musician, I mean, is not selling, I mean, the partition, his score. So he's keeping his score, but he's selling, the right to interpret the score. So at that time, during the 19th century, you had some artists who said it must be the same with the painting. You must not sell your painting, you must keep it, and then organize paying shows, and then get, financed by the entrance of it. And so, well, maybe nowadays it is also something that will be experienced. These are just questions, but...
No, I completely agree. I think we're very close to reaching that point. But I keep thinking about my sculpture, hearing your question. Because imagine we have 3D printing, it means that there's no shipping involved. And shipping is the huge cost in an exhibition, especially from India to Europe, for instance. So we'll be, shipping through 3D printer sculptures and painting and so on. My point is that maybe the economy, the economy in which we are entering is an economy more of information. So that's where the value is. So as collector, we should distribute or collections. We should make them available. We should use tools, social network, digital tools we have to create values on a more information-based and share it as much as possible, which was, I think, is not a model in which we're coming from. It's like a new step. And there's probably a lot of things to invent here.
Of course, unfortunately, 3D printers are also being brilliant at making fakes.
Sure,
Which is
it's true.
it's a considerable worry for the police.
But are fakes such a problem?
Well,
I mean, I don't want to be provocative,
that's a
but I mean,
problem of authenticity.
if it is, I mean, it really depends on. Maybe it's not that
Maybe
much
it's
a
not
problem.
that bad. Are there other questions in the room? So there's one right at the back I can see.
Yes, hello. I have a question, I think mainly for the artist. I wanted to know his point of view on who he thinks is the main driving force in contemporary art, if it's a museum director, an art critic, the gallerist, and do you think it should be that way?
I think the main driving force is the artist. And I think it should be that way. And as what concerns the subject we just discussed before, it's very hard to predict the future. But one thing is always sure: things change. Nothing ever remains the same. But I've seen. I said this as an answer to you because I've seen things move from, let's say, 60s, 70s, and things started moving very fast in the 80s from a more important initiative role of the artist to a less important one. So that is why I would like to defend this position. But I don't know if I can manage against this massive industry that it has become. So.
Another question? I think I see that. Yes.
Yeah, because I'm very glad to hear you try to involve the society and you have a more democratic way to sponsor art and artists. But because I'm not directly working in the art world, although I have a close relationship, people who work in the art world, but among my colleagues, for example, my schoolmates, many of them, I think they're in their lifetime, they never enter a gallery or don't mention the art fair. Interest probably one of the reasons, but also the strong reason also because they strongly believe art world is not their world. They believe that's belong to a very exclusive and privileged or very, very expensive world. But of course, it's not true because I bought something just across the street in the Agnès B. Dujoux Gallery at 500 euros. It's not very, very much. But most of people, they still don't have the knowledge to think the art world is also belong to their world. Because I have Chinese origin, I know that many Chinese women have a budget of buying shoes or bags of 2,000 euro or even 10,000 euro. This is no problem for them. But they never think about buying art. But just imagine that the budget of all the Chinese women buying bags, maybe they try to buy art. I'm not saying this to destroy a group LVMH because I think they are important in the art world as sponsor, but just to think that
Yes. So
potential
the question,
the potential collector, how can we reach them? Because we're still a lot of people that are still out of the reach, I think, or they believe they are out of the circle.
Right, you can do like Jeff Koons, you make bags and you make bags so that you can sell bags.
How to reach the collector?
how to start collectors off.
How to start collectors off?
How to reach new young people, how to engage them with art. People Like sports.
Well, I think that we see an enormous expansion of the art world. So you can see already by what that is caused. For example, internet has changed everything radically in the last 20 years. And communication is something, take the metro, have the people have a phone in front of their face instead of addressing their neighbor. So all those means and media, they work. I don't know how to make them even work better. I think I see expansion, and I think from that point on, it is also word of mouth, influencing each other, and that is what you can do personally with the people around you. And these things add up to my idea.
Well, I'm going to speak about the situation in France only, but we had a really incredible cultural policy for the last 30 years through FRAC and Centre d'Art and museums, etc., etc. That was just great. It has created new audiences for the art. But these audiences are, I would say, passive in a way. So we have created spectators for the arts. And I think nowadays we must, create actors for the art, and we must encourage, people to act, to intervene on the art scene, but not by playing a role and by, playing as if they were an artist or a curator or an art critic. And nowadays you have something that is confused, in the role that people can have, and sometimes for the worse. You can see collectors, you are playing, the role of a curator, of an art critic, etc., etc., and sometimes the result is just terrible. So I think we must invent, a new policy to make people, being aware of their abilities, what they can do on the art scene. And I propose to Fondation de France, and this is an axis that we are experiencing through societies, to invest in the university field and high school, just to try to transform a new generation of people who tomorrow will be at the head of firms or will take an active role in the society, and just to allow them to experience the possibility to be active in their relationship to the artist and the art scene. So it can take the form of a commission, for instance. So this is what we are very trying to develop, many commissions in high school and universities also. But I think this is the main point. And we are trying to develop a new program called the New Collectors, next to the new patron, New Collectors. And we are trying to work with the schools, high schools, but also primary school. Because, for instance, in Paris, you have a public collection called the Fonds Municipal d'Art Contemporain, and they are purchasing works of art, and some of them are dedicated to be installed in a primary school. So you have a committee of specialists, going to purchase the work for the school. And so what we are proposing is just to allow maybe the students themselves to buy the works of art. Of course, you must, lead them, guide them, because if not, they're going to buy, the work of their brother, their little brother who's doing drawings. So the thing is that you need a mediator, you need an expert who would be able just to entourer, to guide, and maybe to make a selection of a number of galleries, a number of artists, and just to propose to these kids, to purchase themselves, and to use the budget to purchase the work of art, so that they could understand also what is the price of a work of art, because it can be very shocking or surprising. The very first time I heard about the price of a painting, I was so shocked that it was so expensive. Nowadays, and it was not at that time, I was 15 and I heard, someone who said they wanted to sell a painting for 1,000 francs at that time, and I thought it was huge. And so we must also, teach people, the economy of art.
I would underline that education is very important, which is not really a commercial activity, and I think it has to do with knowing history of art as well, so that when you see a work, you see it in a larger context, in what has been happening over the last 500-600 years, even longer than that. In fact, it's infinity.
I'm going to take the last question, which is right here.
I was wondering, because quite often when I visit a gallery here in Paris, I'm the only visitor. And as we were talking about that the art market is one of the most conservative markets, how could, as a gallerist, are you thinking about how you could more efficiently use your gallery space and in responding more efficiently to this new digital society that we're living in?
We are thinking about it. It is true that we can see that the galleries are you have many people for the opening, but then after you have less people. But on the other hand, I mean, you must have also a space where people can gather. So it is true that it could be more efficiently used, and by organizing maybe meetings, and it is also something we are thinking about with my colleague here about Yeah, so this is also something that I've done, because we are also like little art center, art galleries nowadays turn into little art center. I mean, the quality of the shows that are always curated. Maybe it was not the case in the 19th century, a merchant of art, was not curating his show, I mean, most of the time, so it was just displaying, goods that were to be for sale. Nowadays, I mean, every show is curated. Most of the time you have also texts that are commissioned to people, and people even organize a guided tour and a conference and lectures and meeting and concerts. So we are behaving like a little center of contemporary art. But it is true that we can do more, and that the numerical revolution, must be also included in that reflection. But I don't know yet exactly what we can do. We can rent it for Fashion Week to pay for our rent. So that's what we do most of the time. An opening, rent it for Fashion Week, and you open a new show.
Actually, using social media, and particularly you can do things like Facebook 360 or Instagram Live, so you can actually film and put onto social media what's happening in your gallery. For example, the artist preparing his show. And I think that's a very good way of linking up people who are perhaps far away, but actually giving a life to the gallery.
Sure.
So we've come to the end of a very interesting day. We've talked about lots of new ways of collecting. We've talked about commissioning art, producing art, some of the challenges that are faced. Also, a parallel way of the engagement of art with social responsibility as well, and that was particularly interesting in our last panel. I hope that you've enjoyed the day. I certainly have myself. I think it's a wonderful initiative of Choices to have given us this chance to get together and to talk about these subjects before the gallery weekend, which I think we all agree is a very good way of addressing this issue that a number of our questioners have asked about, which is fewer and fewer people in the galleries, but a gallery weekend is a great way of connecting with collectors. Also, I want to thank Talking Galleries for collaborating, and I think Marion is here to say goodbye and thank you to you all.
Yes, thank you, Georgina. Thank you all. Really, I was really glad that we have made this first day, this launch day for Paris Gallery Weekend. Well, of course, I first have to say that we all wait you in galleries tomorrow and Sunday. Gallery will be open from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. And there is a lot of events that are going on in the gallery, so you all have the program in your bags. And so please come and make a tour, make a selection, discover galleries. And so we hope to see you, well, a lot of time, many times during the year, and of course each year for the Paris Gallery Weekend. Thank you very much, Georgina. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Lucia, Sol. I have to thank my team too, Marie Delas and Clara, because they have made a really good job for this day to be possible. Thank you very much. When you're leaving, you can have a little show a quick look at the video from Talking the Galleries, because they are also have a rich program, and their next symposium is in January 2018, so everybody's welcome.
Yes, and I'm so sorry, I forgot to thank my wonderful panelists. So Jean, Jérôme, Kees, and Sandra.
And the last word,
very much.
I mean, for people who are interested in the program of Fondation de France, we have a little presentation that you can take.